Picture this, you're visiting Tuscaloosa over Texas on a somewhat stormy day. Some attractions are closed, but you're still enjoying the day at the park, despite the enhanced risk of severe weather. The clouds start to grow darker, and all of a sudden you hear it. A tornado siren. A tornado has touched down in the city of Arlington, and the worst case scenario is about to happen. A large tornado is approaching Six Flags Over Texas, and you're stuck at the park. This is what if a tornado hits Six Flags Over Texas. Tornadoes are one of, if not the world's most dangerous natural disasters. They're partly unpredictable, they're wrecking force, and give you so little time to take shelter before they wipe out foundations. These months in April to May are infamous for being known as tornado season in Tornado Alley. And for those who don't know who Tornado Alley is, it's a zone right in the middle of the United States, and is a breeding zone for big twisters. Tornado Alley reaches as far down as North Texas, putting lots of businesses, homes, and towns at risk of possibly facing destruction over this tornado season. And as someone who's grown up in Texas, I faced my fair share of tornado warnings and close calls. So as a coaster enthusiast myself, if a tornado is near the Arlington area, the worst case scenario comes to mind. A tornado actually hitting Six Flags Over Texas. And I'm sure any Texas enthusiast who has Over Texas as their home park has thought the same. This also applies to Frontier City in Oklahoma, another state prone to big twisters. Now of course, this does not mean that I wish this type of destruction on over Texas, and I seriously hope it never happens, with this video's main goal being the effects of this worst case scenario. And what would you do if you were actually at the park? What are the safest places in over Texas? And demonstrating how historically, it was actually pretty common for tornadoes to get close to over Texas. But without further ado, let's get started. So for those who don't know, I actually made the exact same video a year or two of my channel, where my editing wasn't that good, and I didn't really know what to do with that video. It was more of a random scenario that didn't really serve a purpose.
The tornado has passed, and luckily no one has died. No one really got hurt that much.
Huh? So this video will take a different turn, and actually do something. Which are the three things? The chances of a tornado actually hitting over Texas, the safest places in the park if you were caught in the middle of a tornado at the park, and the cost of destruction if a tornado seriously wiped out over Texas completely. Again, I do not wish for this to happen out over Texas, but it's purely for the sake of a scenario, and to answer the untimely question of what if a tornado hits over Texas. So first things first, let's get started with the chances of a tornado actually hitting the park. Like we stated in the beginning, Tornado Alley actually reaches some far points in the middle of the US, and it reaches as far as North Texas, which includes the city of Fort Worth and Dallas. And just so happens the city of Arlington is right in the middle of DFW, therefore including it in the Tornado Alley's path. Now of course, just because the city is located in Tornado Alley, it doesn't necessarily mean that a tornado will hit that city. There's plenty of cities in Tornado Alley that can miss this type of destruction. But for the city of Arlington, it's actually pretty common for tornadoes to hit that place. All the way back starting to the 1950s, there's been documented tornadoes that have touched down and hit parts of Arlington, Texas. And those are just documented. There could be plenty more earlier than that. But the point is, it's not rare for tornadoes to hit Arlington, Texas, and all the businesses, including over Texas, are at risk. Now when doing the research, the most major tornado that has hit Arlington, Texas was rated as an EF3. If you're unaware of the enhanced Fujita scale, let me break it down real fast. Essentially, the enhanced Fujita scale, or the EF scale, is a way to measure a tornado and see just how destructive it can be. The way these measurements work, by checking the wind speed of a tornado and seeing its overall cost of destruction. The scale can start from 0 all the way up to 5, the 5 being the most destructive. Now like I said, we're looking at the chances of a tornado hitting over Texas, and this also means the size. Now when doing the research, like I said, the most powerful tornado we ever had was an EF3. And essentially this means a tornado that can uplift trees, toss cars around, destroy mobile homes, and essentially anything that's not secured to the ground or is pretty weak in construction will be completely demolished. It's not as bad as an EF5, but it's still very destructive and can cost lives. Now for a tornado hitting over Texas specifically, the chances are slim, but they're not zero. This photo was taken on June 16, 2019 by Reddit user Zoni's Coasters as an EF1 nearly hits over Texas. Luckily it didn't cause any destruction, but it means that over Texas getting hit by a tornado and being put on the damaged path has a chance. Though it's a relatively small chance, it's still possible, as weather can be really unpredictable. But now what would happen if you're caught in this worst case scenario at the park with a tornado heading right for you? What are the safest places in over Texas, and how could you survive the storm? Well, first things first, the chances of a tornado hitting over Texas while you're at the park are even lower than a tornado hitting the park itself. This is because over Texas tends to be very proactive in monitoring the weather and checking conditions for their park. The past few times this year that over Texas had severe weather in the area, they would close the park early or not open at all, to ensure guests are not there during a severe or dangerous situation. But believe it or not, there's a safety system in place for severe weather with guests in the park. I've actually experienced it myself back in 2020. There was a severe storm approaching the park, about 2 hours of the park closing, and on all the speakers the music stopped with the warning system telling people to take shelter or evacuate the park.
Be aware that a weather alert has been issued for this area.
Now, it wasn't a tornado, but it was dated that tornadoes did actually happen in the area, and it goes to show that over Texas is prepared in the case of any type of storm headed in their direction. But again, worst case scenario, if you're in the park, a tornado is headed right for you, and you don't have time to go to your car, you're gonna have to take shelter in the park. So in this scenario, we're gonna pretend an EF3 tornado is headed towards over Texas, as the EF3 was the most destructive tornado that has ever hit Arlington, Texas, making it the worst case scenario. In EF3 damage, it's typically lifting up cars, destroying trees, and relocating objects that are not fastened to the ground. It's not total destruction, but it's still pretty bad. In any tornado, the safest place to be is somewhere indoors, away from windows, and the most center part of that structure. The reason why is because there's a lot of debris in tornadoes, and any edge of that structure can easily be hit by those debris. Or if the winds are so strong, the outer portion of the structure will be first to go, unless it's a mobile home, because then the whole thing will go. So with that in mind, when looking for shelter in over Texas, you need big buildings that don't have a lot of windows and have a center point in the building. So a tornado's coming right towards you and you're in the front of the park. Where do you go? Well, there's a few options. The Looney Tunes Mall, Justice League Battle for Metropolis, and Studio 6. All these buildings are very interior and have no windows the further you go in. Taking shelter in the corners that are closest to the center will definitely keep you safe. The reason I didn't include All American Cafe is because it's full of glass windows everywhere. Even if you went to the back of the store, it's a high possibility that glass can get in there and more debris. If you're caught in the Gotham City section, the queue line for Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast and the queue line for Batman the Ride could be good areas for safe spaces. For Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast, when you enter the clown mouth, that bottom part of the queue line that no one uses is the most interior part of the queue line and away from any windows. In Batman the Ride, any part that's underground and is away from any openings and windows is again a safe space. In the tower section, there's not many big buildings, but you could definitely take shelter in the restrooms, and that goes for any area of the park. Just make sure you're in the center part of the restroom and stay away from the doors. Now what's funny is, by the attractions of Rodeo and Fiesta de las Tazas, there's a little door right next to the ride. I used to think it was a tornado shelter, but in reality it's just maintenance bays that go underneath the attraction. Now if it was a very serious event and the park staff opened up the area for you to go underground, that would definitely be a safe space, as for any underground area of the park is a prime spot to be safe during a big storm like a tornado. But continuing on, for the Texas and Mexico section, you could take shelter in the Casa de las Banderas restaurant, the Crazy Horse Saloon, and all the way inside Runaway Mountain. Again, the most center point of the attraction or building. With that said, again, it's a very low chance that you'll be caught in a tornado while at the park. But it's always good to know safe zones and be prepared for the hypothetical, though the park is very on top of the situations and will ensure that you're evacuated before any type of storm hits the park, or they'll have the park closed straight up. But now, if a tornado hit over Texas, what attractions will be destroyed, and what will be the future of the park in this worst case event? Now again, for this scenario, we're going to pretend an EF3 tornado hit the park. As history has shown, the highest record tornado that has hit Arlington was an EF3. Nothing too major, but still could cause some serious damage to the park. And if the park took a direct hit, based on the scale, here's what would be damaged. Anything made of wood, anything not completely fastened to the ground, and sure, it wouldn't be total destruction, but a lot of buildings would have their roof ripped off, windows blown out, and depending on the debris in the tornado, it could be way worse, especially if the twister is throwing cars. As for the attractions, the way to predict how they'll turn out is from previous experience when a hurricane hit a Six Flags park, this being Six Flags New Orleans. Now of course, the Category 5 has no correlation with an EF3 tornado, as one is definitely much stronger than the other. But from the damage of Hurricane Katrina, we saw many of their legacy attractions, like the Zephyr, a wooden coaster, being damaged beyond belief. But some of their steel attractions actually survived, like their version of Batman the Ride, which managed to be salvaged and given to Fiesta Texas now under the new name Goliath. And if you didn't know, now you know. They also had a Vekoma Hurricane that's still on the lot, and while it's rusted away, it's still pretty stable from dealing with a hurricane. So if that was the result from high winds, then if a tornado hit over Texas, we can predict some attractions that'll be severely damaged, which will include Judge Roy Scream. It's made of completely wood, and has been around for a while. With some serious high winds from an EF3 tornado, we could see parts of the track missing, and a lot of the structure being demolished. The same goes for New Texas Giant. Even if it's half steel, half wood, the high speeds from an EF3 tornado would easily rip apart its wooden supports, and damage parts of the coaster, possibly beyond belief. The same for any older attractions like Runaway Mine Train or El Asadero, as the age will show with EF3 wins. For any smaller attractions or flat rides, they could possibly be ripped out of the ground, as that's what EF3 tornadoes do. But as for attractions that would survive, I could definitely see Titan still standing, even if some of its mechanics might be broken. Shockwave might make it out, definitely Batman the Ride, and even the tallest attraction in the park, Texas Skyscraper, could make it out with some obvious damage to the swings and mechanics of the attraction. As for the tornado's damage path, you can't really predict it, as it's never happened before, and hopefully never will. But what we do know is that the damage cost will be very steep, with a possible upwards of millions of dollars of damage, even if only a part of the park was damaged. And say this was a Six Flags New Orleans Part 2 event, depending on the damage and severity of the park, they might not even rebuild. They might just salvage the safe attractions, give them to different parks, and scrap the park altogether. But looking on a positive light, since Over Texas was the first ever Six Flags park, it's also very possible they might rebuild. Again, very hard to predict, as it's an event that never happened before, and it'll be very different than Six Flags New Orleans, which hopefully never happens to my home park. But in result, here's what we know from all this. Tornadoes are actually very common in Arlington, Texas, and they've been happening for many years. For a tornado to go the wrong direction and hit over Texas is not a 0% chance, but it's not entirely high either. It's very possible, and it'll be very rare, but it's not a confirmed no of happening. Next, we also know that Six Flags is very proactive when it comes to severe weather, and will shut down the park in case of any sign, so it's a very low chance you'll be caught in the middle of a tornado while at the park. But if so happens that you are in the park in that event, there are some safe places around the park to ensure your survival. And most importantly, a tornado hitting over Texas will be very costly, and could ruin the future of the park, depending on what the higher-ups will want to do after surveying the damage like they did with Six Flags New Orleans. In that event, they chose to abandon the park and save certain attractions. And the same could happen to Over Texas, but because it's the original Six Flags park, it might survive. Despite all this, it's a very slim chance, and I do not wish for this to happen to Over Texas at all. This is only a fun video to answer the question all over Texas home parkers have been wondering after living through Tornado Alley myself, and to give a little tribute to the current tornado season we're in.
It's the wonder of nature, baby!
While also combining my love of theme parks. Anyways, what do you think? What would happen if a tornado hit over Texas? And what are some other Six Flags parks, or theme parks in general, that could be at risk to natural disasters? Comment down below. Anyways, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the notification bell to know when new videos come out on my channel. This is JB Thrills, signing out.